My boyfriend denied that I am his girlfriend to impress his high school crush. So I made him single and depressed. I'd been dating Nathan for 8 months. We met at a coffee shop where we both studied for our grad school exams. He was sweet and funny and always brought me my favorite croissant on Friday mornings. We spent every weekend together, knew each other's families, and had plans for a vacation to Costa Rica. I thought things were perfect until his old high school crush Olivia moved to our city. She got a job at the marketing firm 2 blocks from Nathan's office. The first time he mentioned her, his whole face changed. He told me she was the one who got away, the girl he'd been obsessed with for 4 years of high school. She never gave him the time of day back then because she was dating the quarterback. I should have seen the red flags, but I figured it was just nostalgia. The first time I met Olivia was at Nathan's company happy hour. I walked in holding his favorite beer I'd picked up for him. He saw me, then saw Olivia at the bar and literally stepped away from me. When I went to hug him, he stuck out his hand for a handshake. He introduced me as just someone from grad school. Not his girlfriend, not even his friend, just someone he knew. Olivia smiled at me politely, then went back to talking to Nathan about their high school memories. I stood there holding his beer like an idiot while he laughed at all her stories. When I tried to join the conversation, he actually told me Olivia probably wasn't interested in academic stuff. She had a master's degree in marketing. He knew this but acted like I was the boring one. I left after an hour. Nathan texted me later saying he panicked and didn't want to seem taken in case it made things weird with Olivia since they worked so close to each other. He said it was just professional courtesy. He promised it wouldn't happen again. The next week, Nathan invited me to his roommate Jake's birthday party. I wore the dress Nathan loved and showed up excited to meet more of his friends. Olivia was there. The second Nathan saw her, he left me by the door and went to talk to her. When his roommate Jake asked who I was, Nathan said I was thinking about renting the spare room in their house. Jake looked confused because they didn't have a spare room. Nathan quickly changed the subject. I spent the party watching Nathan follow Olivia around like a puppy. He got her drinks, laughed too loud at her jokes, and even told the story about our first date, but replaced me with a random girl from his gym. When Olivia asked if he was seeing anyone, he said he was keeping his options open. I was standing right there. His actual girlfriend was 5 feet away and he said he was single. The final straw was Nathan's office barbecue. He specifically asked me not to come because it was employees only. I found out from his Instagram that +1s were welcome and Olivia brought some guy she'd just started seeing. Nathan posted 12 pictures from the event and liked every single one of Olivia's posts. That's when I decided Nathan needed to learn a lesson. I started with Jake. Nathan's roommate was actually really sweet and happened to be single. I asked Jake to get coffee to talk about Nathan's weird behavior. Jake already thought Nathan was being an ass about the whole situation. I mentioned how beautiful and smart Olivia was, and what a shame Nathan didn't have the confidence to actually ask her out. Jake agreed she seemed interesting. I suggested Jake should talk to her at the next group hang since Nathan was clearly never going to make a move. The next weekend was trivia night at a local bar. Nathan always took me, but this time he said he was going with work friends. I showed up anyway with Jake and some other people. Nathan's face when he saw us was priceless. He tried to act casual but kept staring at Jake and me. When Olivia arrived, Jake immediately went to talk to her. He bought her a drink and made her laugh with some story about his boat. Nathan tried to interrupt, but Jake smoothly included him in the conversation, then steered it back to Olivia. By the end of trivia, Jake had Olivia's number. Nathan was furious. He actually pulled Jake aside and said it was wrong to hit on Olivia since Nathan saw her first. Jake laughed and said Nathan had a girlfriend, so why did it matter? Nathan said I wasn't his girlfriend. We were just hanging out sometimes. Jake looked at him like he was insane and said that's not what Nathan had told him for 8 months. Within 2 weeks, Jake and Olivia were officially dating. I got home around 11 and was getting ready for bed when someone started pounding on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Nathan standing in the hallway looking like he'd just run here. His hair was messed up and his shirt was wrinkled. I opened the door and he pushed past me into my living room. He started talking before I could even close the door behind him. He wanted to know what I said to Jake. He asked why Jake suddenly decided to go after Olivia. His voice was loud and his face was getting red. I stayed calm and told him I just mentioned that Olivia seemed nice and that Jake was single. I said I thought they might get along. Nathan's face turned even redder as he realized what that meant. If he admitted he was mad about Jake dating Olivia, he'd have to explain why it bothered him so much when he supposedly had a girlfriend. He couldn't say the real reason without admitting he'd been treating me terribly for weeks. He stood there opening and closing his mouth like he couldn't figure out what to say. Then he changed his approach completely. He sat down on my couch and his voice got softer. He said we needed to talk about our relationship. He actually called me his girlfriend for the first time in weeks. The word sounded weird coming out of his mouth after all those times he pretended not to know me. I asked him directly why he told Jake I wasn't his girlfriend, if that's what I supposedly was to him. He started making excuses about work dynamics and not wanting things to be weird in the office. He said Olivia worked so close to his building and he didn't want to make professional relationships awkward. I just stared at him while he talked. Every excuse sounded more ridiculous than the last one. I told Nathan I needed space to think about whether I wanted to be with someone who was ashamed to claim me in public. His whole body language changed and he looked scared. He promised he would do better and that it wouldn't happen again. I'd heard those exact words before after the happy hour incident. I was done believing his empty promises. I told him to leave and that I'd contact him when I was ready to talk. He tried to argue, but I opened the door and stood there waiting until he finally left. The next day, I met Ariana at the library for our regular study session. I couldn't focus on the textbook in front of me and kept reading the same paragraph over and over. Ariana noticed after about 20 minutes and asked what was wrong. I gave her the basic version of what had been happening with Nathan and Olivia. I told her about the denials and Jake and Olivia dating and Nathan showing up at my apartment. She closed her laptop and pushed her books aside. She said Nathan's behavior was completely wrong and that no one should treat their partner that way. She asked why I was even considering giving him another chance. I didn't have a good answer for that. That evening, Janice called to check in like she usually did on Wednesday nights. I filled her in on everything that happened at trivia night, and Jake getting Olivia's number, and them officially dating now. I told her about Nathan's late-night visit to my apartment. Janice actually laughed and said Nathan was getting exactly what he deserved. Then she asked if I was really going to give him another chance. I admitted I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Part of me still remembered how good things were before Olivia moved to the city. Janice got quiet for a second and then said something that stuck with me. She said the person who treats you well only when it's easy isn't actually treating you well at all. She reminded me that Nathan had a choice every single time, and he chose to make me invisible. I sat there holding my phone after we hung up and thought about what she said. Over the next few days, Nathan sent me about 30 text messages. They were all apologies and promises to make things right. He said he missed me and wanted to talk in person. He sent me photos of things we did together with captions about good memories. I ignored most of them and focused on my grad school work instead. I had a big paper due and I used that as an excuse to not deal with the Nathan situation. It felt good to let him sit with the uncertainty for once, instead of me always being the one waiting around for him to decide how he felt. Jake called me on Saturday morning. He said he wanted to apologize for being so clueless at his birthday party. He had no idea Nathan and I were actually dating and he thought Nathan was just being weird about some casual thing. He felt terrible for not standing up for me when Nathan introduced me as someone looking to rent a room. I told Jake it wasn't his fault and that Nathan was the one who lied. Jake said he'd talked to some other friends, and everyone thought Nathan had been acting strange lately. I told Jake I was glad he and Olivia hit it off. He said Olivia was actually really cool, and they had a lot in common. They both loved sailing and had similar taste in music. Hearing that made me feel oddly satisfied. At least something good came out of this whole mess. Jake said he hoped Nathan and I could work things out, but that he understood if we couldn't. He promised he wouldn't make things awkward in the friend group either way. The grad school mixer was on Tuesday night at a bar near campus. I almost didn't go because I wasn't in a social mood, but Ariana convinced me it would be good to get out. I was standing by the drink table when I saw the barista from the coffee shop where Nathan and I first met. She came over and said hi and asked how I was doing. Then she asked about Nathan since she used to see us studying together all the time. I told her we were taking a break. Saying it out loud made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. She looked sympathetic and said she was sorry to hear that. I realized it was the first time I'd admitted to anyone outside my close friends that things might really be over. The next morning, I got a text from someone I didn't know. The message said he was Evander from Nathan's office and asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I stared at my phone for a minute, trying to figure out if this was some kind of setup. He sent another text explaining that he'd been at the happy hour where Nathan introduced me as just someone from grad school. He said he felt bad about how awkward that whole situation seemed and wanted to check if I was okay. I texted back yes to coffee, mostly because I was curious what Nathan's coworker had to say. We met at a place near campus the next afternoon. Evander was tall with dark hair and glasses, and he seemed genuinely concerned when he sat down across from me. He apologized for reaching out randomly, but said he couldn't stop thinking about that night at the bar. He'd noticed Nathan acting weird around me, and then later heard from other people at work that Nathan and I were actually dating. I appreciated that someone from Nathan's world actually cared enough to check on me. We talked for almost an hour about the whole situation. Evander told me Nathan had been completely miserable at work lately. He was constantly checking his phone during meetings and seemed distracted all the time. His boss had even pulled him aside to ask if everything was okay, because Nathan's work quality was slipping. Evander also mentioned that Olivia seemed really happy with Jake. She brought Jake to the office once to meet some people, and they looked good together. The funny part was that Olivia had no idea Nathan had feelings for her. She just thought he was being friendly as a coworker. Evander said it was both funny and kind of sad watching Nathan pine after someone who didn't even know he existed that way. I thanked Evander for the coffee and for caring enough to reach out. It felt good to know that not everyone in Nathan's life thought his behavior was acceptable. 2 days later, Nathan showed up at my apartment again. This time he had flowers and a bag of takeout from my favorite Thai place. I opened the door and saw him standing there looking hopeful and nervous. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, but I let him in instead. He set the food on my kitchen counter and handed me the flowers. I put them down without looking for a vase and told him that food and apologies weren't enough to fix what he'd done to our relationship and my trust. He nodded and said he knew that, but he wanted to try anyway. We sat on my couch and he finally said the thing I'd been waiting to hear. He admitted that seeing Olivia again made him turn back into his insecure high school self. He said he handled everything terribly, and he knew he'd hurt me. I appreciated the honesty, but I pointed out that his insecurity led him to treat me like I was invisible and worthless. He denied me 3 separate times in front of people. He'd rewritten our history and excluded me from his work event. All of that came from his choice to prioritize some fantasy over the real person sitting next to him. Nathan asked what he could do to fix this. I told him I genuinely didn't know if it could be fixed. The hurt from being denied at the happy hour, from being called a potential roommate at Jake's party, from being told not to come to the barbecue while Olivia brought her date, all of it had piled up into something too heavy to just forgive. He sat there looking defeated, and I felt a confusing mix of satisfaction and sadness. Part of me had wanted him to fight harder for us, but another part knew that the relationship we had was already gone. The Nathan who brought me croissants on Friday mornings wouldn't have done what he did. Either I'd been wrong about who he was, or he'd changed when it mattered most. He left my apartment 20 minutes later without eating any of the food he'd brought. The next week, Camelia texted our group chat about a dinner she was planning. She mentioned that Jake and Olivia would be there along with some other friends. I almost said no because the idea of sitting across from the couple Nathan had inadvertently created felt weird. But then I realized that hiding away from social events was letting Nathan's behavior control my life. I decided to go and show up determined to have a good time regardless of any awkwardness. The dinner was at a restaurant downtown that served tapas. I got there right on time and found the group already seated at a long table. Jake waved me over and I took a seat near Camelia. Olivia was sitting next to Jake and she smiled at me when I sat down. They really were adorable together in a way that felt genuine and easy. Jake had his arm around the back of her chair and they kept making each other laugh with inside jokes. Olivia turned to me during appetizers and mentioned she'd heard I was in grad school. She asked what I was studying and seemed actually interested when I explained my research. She asked thoughtful questions about my work and made comments that showed she understood what I was talking about. I realized she was genuinely interested in getting to know people, which made Nathan's assessment of her as someone who wouldn't care about academic stuff even more ridiculous. We talked for a while about her marketing work and my research, and it felt nice to have a normal conversation. During the main course, Camelia brought up Nathan. She said he'd been acting really strange lately and asked if anyone knew what was going on with him. The table got a little quiet, and Jake carefully explained that Nathan was dealing with some personal relationship stuff. Olivia looked confused and asked if Nathan was seeing someone. Nobody answered right away, and the silence became awkward. I decided to just be direct about it. I said that Nathan and I had been dating for 8 months, but we were currently taking a break. Olivia's face showed genuine surprise, and she looked at Jake like she was checking if this was true. She turned back to me and apologized for not knowing. She said Nathan had never mentioned having a girlfriend in any of their conversations at work. I told her it was fine and that it wasn't her fault. Jake squeezed Olivia's hand under the table and the conversation moved on to other topics. But I noticed Olivia looking thoughtful for the rest of dinner, like she was putting pieces of a puzzle together in her head. After we left the restaurant, Olivia caught my arm near the parking lot. She glanced back toward where Jake was saying goodbye to Camelia and some of the others. Her face looked different from it had during dinner, more serious and a little worried. She asked if Nathan's strange behavior around her at work had anything to do with problems in my relationship with him. I felt my stomach twist because this was the conversation I'd been avoiding. I didn't want to seem like some jealous girlfriend making drama, but I also wasn't going to lie to protect Nathan anymore. I told her a careful version of what happened, leaving out the worst details but not hiding the basic truth. I explained that Nathan and I had been dating for 8 months when she moved to town, and that he denied our relationship multiple times in front of her because he wanted to seem available. Olivia's expression changed from curious to uncomfortable as I talked. She apologized and said she had no idea Nathan had feelings for her beyond being work friends. She looked genuinely upset that her presence had caused problems between us. I assured her it wasn't her fault at all, that Nathan's choices were his own. She nodded slowly, and then mentioned something that made my chest tighten. She said Nathan had been kind of intense at work lately, always finding excuses to stop by her desk with coffee, or trying to start conversations about non-work stuff. She'd thought he was just being friendly since they worked in nearby buildings and ran into each other often. Now she realized it was probably something more than casual friendliness. I could see her putting all the pieces together in her head, remembering interactions that probably seemed weird at the time. I told Olivia again that none of this was on her, that she hadn't done anything wrong. She seemed relieved to hear that, and her shoulders relaxed a little. Then she smiled and said Jake was really great, and she was happy with how things were going between them. That made me smile for real because at least something good had come out of this whole mess. Jake was a genuinely nice guy, and Olivia seemed sweet, and they actually made sense together in a way that felt natural and easy. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. I was in the library working on a research paper when I saw his name pop up on my screen. The message said I was trying to embarrass him in front of everyone by having dinner with Jake and Olivia. He said I was deliberately making him look bad and trying to ruin his friendships. I stared at the text for a long moment, feeling anger build in my chest. I typed back that I was allowed to have a social life and spend time with whoever I wanted. I told him he didn't get to control who I was friends with just because he felt uncomfortable. My finger hit send before I could second-guess myself. Within 30 seconds, my phone was ringing. I almost didn't answer, but I knew ignoring him would just make him call again. I picked up and his voice came through sharp and angry. He accused me of deliberately trying to ruin things with Olivia, of sabotaging any chance he might have had with her. I actually laughed, but it came out bitter and harsh. I pointed out that Olivia was happily dating his roommate and had never been interested in him in the first place. She saw him as a work friend and nothing more. He got quiet for a second, and then his voice changed to something that sounded almost desperate. He said I didn't understand what it was like to see someone you'd wanted for years finally within reach. To have that person right there after thinking about them for so long. My anger flared hot and I cut him off. I told him he'd had someone who actually wanted him, someone who was real and present and chose him every day. He threw that away chasing some fantasy version of a girl who never gave him the time of day in high school. Now he had neither of us, and that was his own fault. The silence on the other end felt heavy and awful. Then Nathan said something mean about me being bitter, and I said something mean back about him being pathetic. The call ended with both of us angry, and I sat there in the library feeling shaky and upset. I realized this might actually be over for real this time. The relationship I thought was solid 8 months ago had completely fallen apart into something ugly and broken. I wasn't sure there was anything left worth saving anymore. That weekend, Ariana texted asking if I wanted to go dancing with some people from our grad program. I almost said no because I felt tired and sad and not really in the mood to be around people. But Ariana insisted and said I'd been moping around campus all week and needed to get out. She was right, even though I didn't want to admit it. I agreed to go and spent an hour getting ready, putting on makeup and a dress I hadn't worn in months. We met up with 5 other grad students at a club downtown that played decent music and wasn't too crowded. For the first time in weeks, I actually had fun. I danced with Ariana and laughed at stupid jokes and didn't think about Nathan or Olivia or any of the drama for whole stretches of time. It felt amazing to just enjoy myself without worrying about Nathan's feelings or whether I was doing something that would upset him. I remembered what it was like to feel light and free and not constantly anxious. Around midnight, someone took a group photo of all of us on the dance floor. I was in the middle with my arms around Ariana and another girl from my statistics class, all of us smiling and sweaty and happy. I posted it to social media without really thinking about it, just wanting to capture the good moment. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with texts from Nathan. He asked who the guy in the background was, demanded to know if I was seeing someone new, said I was moving on pretty fast. I looked at the photo trying to figure out which guy he even meant. There were random people in the background, but nobody I was with or talking to. His jealousy after everything he'd put me through made me so angry I wanted to throw my phone. Here he was monitoring my social media and getting possessive when he'd spent months pretending I didn't exist, so he could chase after someone else. The hypocrisy was unbelievable. I didn't respond to his text because anything I said would just start another fight, and I was done having the same argument over and over. I ignored his texts for 3 days before finally sending a short message. We needed to talk in person and figure out if we were actually broken up or trying to work through this mess. Nathan responded within minutes saying yes, asking where I wanted to meet. I suggested the coffee shop where we first met, which felt right in a sad sort of way. He agreed immediately, and we set a time for Saturday afternoon. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Going back to where everything started to officially end, things felt like closing a circle. I spent the days leading up to Saturday trying to prepare myself emotionally, but nothing really worked. Part of me kept hoping he'd somehow say the right thing and fix everything. Another part knew that was impossible after what he'd done. Saturday came and I walked to the coffee shop 20 minutes early. I ordered my usual drink and sat at a table near the window where we used to study together. The barista recognized me and asked where Nathan was, which made my stomach hurt. I told her he was coming later and left it at that. When Nathan walked in exactly on time, he looked different. Tired and sad with circles under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping well. He got his coffee and sat down across from me without trying to hug or touch me. We both just stared at our drinks for a minute. Part of me still wanted to comfort him when I saw how miserable he looked. My first instinct was to reach across the table and hold his hand like I always used to. But then I remembered standing alone at his work happy hour, holding his beer while he laughed with Olivia, and pretended I was just someone from grad school. I remembered Jake's birthday party where Nathan told people I was looking to rent a non-existent spare room. I remembered finding out about the office barbecue on Instagram where plus ones were welcome, but I wasn't invited because Nathan wanted to look available for Olivia. My resolve came back strong and I kept my hands wrapped around my coffee cup. Nathan started talking first. He apologized again and said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about his behavior over the past few weeks. His voice was quiet and he wouldn't really look at me, just stared at the table between us. He admitted that his obsession with Olivia was about his own ego and insecurity, not actual feelings for her as a person. He said he'd built her up in his head for so many years as this perfect girl who rejected him, and when she suddenly appeared in his life again, he regressed to being that insecure high school kid who desperately wanted her attention. He knew it was messed up and he was sorry for hurting me. I listened to his whole speech without interrupting. When he finally stopped talking and looked up at me with those sad eyes, I took a breath and told him I appreciated the self-awareness. It was good that he'd figured out why he acted that way. But understanding why he did it didn't change what he actually did to me and to our relationship. Being denied 3 separate times in front of different people, being called just someone from grad school like I meant nothing to him, watching him chase after someone else while claiming to love me, all of that broke something important. Trust wasn't just cracked, it was completely shattered into pieces I couldn't figure out how to put back together. He asked if there was any way to rebuild that trust. His voice had this desperate edge to it, like he was hoping I'd have some answer or solution. I was honest and told him I didn't know. The person I thought I was dating for 8 months wouldn't have treated me that way. So either I was completely wrong about who he was from the beginning, or he changed when it actually mattered most. Either option made me question everything about our relationship and whether any of it was real. Nathan got defensive then. His whole posture changed and his voice got sharper. He said he was still the same person. He just made some mistakes when he got overwhelmed by the Olivia situation. I cut him off and pointed out that mistakes are accidents. You spill coffee by mistake or forget an appointment by mistake. What he did wasn't accidental. He made deliberate choices to prioritize how Olivia perceived him over my feelings multiple times. At the happy hour, he chose to pretend not to know me. At Jake's party, he chose to lie about who I was. With the barbecue, he chose to exclude me entirely. Those weren't mistakes. They were conscious decisions that showed me exactly where I ranked in his priorities. We sat in painful silence for a while after that. The coffee shop noise continued around us with other people talking and laughing and living their normal lives. But at our table, everything felt heavy and final. We both knew this conversation was heading toward an ending no matter how much we tried to avoid it. I could see it in Nathan's face, and I'm sure he could see it in mine. Finally, I just said it out loud. I thought we should officially break up because I couldn't be with someone I didn't trust. The words came out calmer than I expected, like I'd already accepted this outcome before I even got to the coffee shop. Nathan looked completely devastated. His face crumpled, and for a second I thought he might actually cry right there in public. But he didn't argue with me or try to convince me to give him another chance. He just nodded slowly and said, "Okay," in this quiet, defeated voice. That somehow made everything worse. If he'd fought for us, if he'd begged or promised to do better or shown any kind of passion about not wanting to lose me, maybe I would have felt differently. But his quiet acceptance felt like confirmation that he knew he'd destroyed this relationship beyond repair. He knew what he'd done was unforgivable, and he wasn't even going to try to pretend otherwise. I reached into my bag and pulled out the spare key to his place that I'd been carrying around for months. I set it on the table between us and asked for mine back. Nathan dug in his pocket and pulled out my apartment key, sliding it across to me without saying anything. The exchange of keys felt so final and sad. We'd given each other those keys 4 months into dating, both of us excited about that next step in our relationship. Now we were taking them back and erasing that connection. 8 months that started with so much hope and possibility were officially over, marked by 2 small pieces of metal changing hands in a coffee shop. Walking away from that coffee shop felt surreal. I left Nathan sitting at the table staring at his cold coffee and walked out into the afternoon sunlight. My whole body felt strange, like I was lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I wasn't carrying the weight of his denials anymore, or wondering when the next public humiliation would happen. I didn't have to worry about running into Olivia or watching Nathan transform into someone unrecognizable. But I also felt heavier because I was grieving. Not just grieving the relationship we had, but grieving the relationship I thought we had. The version where Nathan was sweet and attentive and brought me croissants on Friday mornings. The version where we planned vacations together and talked about our future. That relationship was gone, and maybe it had never really existed the way I remembered it. Janice texted me an hour after I got home from the coffee shop and asked if I wanted to grab dinner. I said yes immediately because sitting alone in my apartment felt impossible. We met at this Italian place near campus that had cheap pasta and good wine. She took one look at my face and ordered us both a glass of red without asking. I spent the first 20 minutes just talking while she listened and ate her breadsticks. I told her about the key exchange and Nathan's quiet acceptance and how the whole thing felt both relieving and awful at the same time. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand when I got to the part about walking away from the coffee shop. Janice has this way of listening that makes you feel heard without making it dramatic. She didn't interrupt or try to fix anything, just let me get it all out. When I finally stopped talking, she said I made the right choice, and that anyone who treats you like an option doesn't deserve you as a priority. The words were simple, but they hit exactly right. I'd spent so much time trying to understand Nathan's perspective and make excuses for his behavior that I forgot to consider what I actually deserved from a relationship. Janice reminded me that being someone's girlfriend shouldn't require convincing them to acknowledge you exist. We finished dinner and split a piece of tiramisu, and by the time I got home, I felt a little less hollow. The next week passed in a blur of grad school work and deliberate social activity. Ariana noticed I was quieter than usual during our study sessions and asked if everything was okay. I gave her the basic version about Nathan and me breaking up, and she immediately shifted into supportive friend mode. She started suggesting we study at different coffee shops to change the scenery, and invited me to join her gym class even though we both knew I'd hate it. Janice checked in every day with texts about random stuff that had nothing to do with Nathan, just normal life things that reminded me the world kept turning. Even Camelia reached out after hearing through Jake that Nathan and I had split up. She invited me to a movie night with some people from her work, and I went even though I didn't know anyone there. It felt good to be around people who had no connection to Nathan or Olivia or any of the drama. I threw myself into my research project and actually made real progress on my thesis outline. My advisor commented that I seemed more focused lately, which was funny because I felt like my personal life was a disaster. But maybe that was the point. When one part of your life falls apart, you grip harder onto the parts you can control. Grad school became my anchor, the thing that existed completely separate from relationship drama and friend group complications. Evander sent me a text on Thursday asking how I was holding up. I hadn't expected to hear from him since he was Nathan's coworker, but apparently he felt bad about the whole situation. We met for coffee and he told me Nathan had been a complete mess at work for the past week. He said Nathan barely focused during meetings and snapped at people over small things, which wasn't like him at all. Part of me felt bad hearing that because I never wanted to hurt Nathan. I just couldn't keep being with someone who made me feel invisible. But a bigger part of me thought he needed to sit with the consequences of his actions. You don't get to treat someone badly and then skip straight to feeling better without actually processing what you did wrong. Evander seemed to understand that without me having to explain it. He said Nathan had been asking people at work if they thought he messed up badly, fishing for reassurance that it wasn't that serious. Nobody was giving him the answer he wanted. Even people who didn't know the full story could tell Nathan had screwed up something important. Evander bought me a muffin and told me I deserved better, which felt validating coming from someone in Nathan's world. It reminded me that not everyone was going to take Nathan's side just because they knew him first. Jake called me Friday afternoon sounding stressed and apologetic. He said living with Nathan had gotten really awkward since the breakup, and he wanted me to know it wasn't affecting his relationship with Olivia. Apparently Nathan had actually asked Jake to stop seeing Olivia out of loyalty to him. Jake told him that was ridiculous and unfair, which I appreciated more than I could express. The whole situation put Jake in a weird position because Nathan was his roommate and friend, but Nathan had also treated me terribly, and was now trying to control Jake's dating life. Jake said Nathan kept bringing up how he saw Olivia first, and how Jake should have stayed out of it. I could hear the frustration in Jake's voice as he recounted these conversations. Nathan apparently spent most evenings in his room and barely talked to anyone in the house. The few times Jake tried to include him in normal roommate stuff, Nathan either ignored him or made passive-aggressive comments about betrayal. It sounded exhausting, and I felt guilty that Jake was caught in the middle of something I'd started. I told Jake not to feel caught in the middle, and that his relationship with Olivia had nothing to do with me and Nathan anymore. What happened between Nathan and me was about Nathan's choices and behavior, not about Jake meeting someone he actually liked. Jake seemed relieved to hear me say that. He mentioned that Olivia felt the same way, and they were both hoping Nathan would move past this soon, so things could go back to normal. I appreciated that Jake was trying to be fair to everyone involved, even Nathan, who frankly didn't deserve much consideration at this point. Jake said he and Olivia were planning to look for their own place together in a few months, which would solve the awkward roommate situation. I was genuinely happy for them and told Jake so. It felt good that something positive came out of this whole mess, even if it wasn't the outcome Nathan wanted. Jake thanked me for being cool about everything and promised to check in again soon. After we hung up, I felt lighter knowing that Jake and Olivia weren't letting Nathan's drama affect their relationship. Nathan's Instagram went completely quiet for about 2 weeks. No posts, no stories, nothing. Then suddenly he posted this long caption about learning from mistakes and becoming a better person. It was the kind of post that was clearly written for a specific audience but pretended to be general self-reflection. He talked about recognizing patterns in his behavior and committing to personal growth and all these vague therapy phrases that sounded meaningful but didn't actually say anything specific. There was no mention of me or what he'd actually done wrong, just abstract language about being his best self and learning from the past. I read it twice and then closed the app without commenting or reacting. Part of me wanted to laugh at how performative it was, but mostly I just felt tired. Nathan was doing his public processing moment, showing everyone that he was working on himself and acknowledging he'd made mistakes. But acknowledging mistakes to Instagram isn't the same as actually understanding what you did or changing your behavior. It felt like another version of the same problem, Nathan caring more about how other people perceived him than about genuine self-examination. I let him have his moment without my participation. Camelia stopped by the library where I was studying the following Tuesday. She'd been at a group gathering over the weekend and mentioned that Nathan had been there asking about me. He apparently wanted to know if I was seeing anyone or how I was doing post-breakup. Camelia said she kept her answers vague because she wasn't sure what I'd want her to share. I appreciated her checking with me first, instead of just giving Nathan information. I told her to let him know I was focusing on myself and grad school right now, which was completely true. I wasn't interested in dating or even thinking about relationships. The whole experience with Nathan had left me feeling raw and cautious about trusting people with my feelings. Camelia nodded and said she'd pass that along if Nathan asked again. She also mentioned that Nathan seemed genuinely sad at the gathering, not just performing sadness but actually struggling. I didn't know what to do with that information. I wasn't responsible for Nathan's feelings anymore, and I couldn't fix his sadness even if I wanted to. He created this situation through his own choices, and now he had to deal with the emotional fallout. A month after the breakup, I ran into Nathan at the bookstore near campus. I was browsing the psychology section looking for research materials when I turned the corner, and there he was standing by the philosophy shelves. We both froze for a second, clearly not expecting to see each other. The moment stretched out uncomfortably until Nathan said hi in this quiet, careful voice. I said hi back, and we stood there in the aisle making awkward small talk about what books we were looking for. He looked different somehow. Maybe just tired or maybe actually changed in some small way I couldn't identify. We talked for maybe 5 minutes about nothing important, just surface-level conversation between two people who used to know each other well. Then Nathan apologized again for how he treated me. He said it differently this time, more specific and less defensive. He mentioned the happy hour and Jake's party and excluding me from the barbecue, actually naming the things he'd done wrong instead of hiding behind vague language about mistakes. He looked genuinely remorseful standing there holding a book about existentialism, and I could tell he'd been thinking about this conversation for weeks. I accepted his apology because it felt sincere and specific in a way his previous apologies hadn't been. But I also made it clear that accepting an apology doesn't mean wanting to get back together. Those are two separate things that people often confuse. You can forgive someone for hurting you while also recognizing that the relationship itself is over. Nathan nodded and said he understood, that he wasn't asking to get back together or even hoping for that. He said he just wanted me to know he was sorry, and that he hoped I'd find someone who treats me the way I deserve. The words sounded rehearsed but also genuine, like he'd practiced what to say but actually meant it. I told him I hoped he figured out his stuff with therapy and self-reflection, and I meant it. I didn't want Nathan to suffer forever. I just wanted him to understand why his behavior was hurtful, and maybe treat the next person better. The conversation ended on a surprisingly mature note with both of us acknowledging what happened without getting angry or defensive. We said goodbye and went back to our separate book browsing, and I realized standing there in the psychology section that I didn't feel angry anymore. The sharp edge of betrayal that had been sitting in my chest for weeks had dulled into something more manageable. I was still hurt and disappointed about how everything went down, about the 8 months that ended so badly, and the relationship I thought we had that maybe never really existed. But the active anger was gone, replaced by something calmer and sadder. I checked out my books and walked back to campus in the afternoon sunlight, feeling like maybe I was actually starting to heal from all of this. Over the next few weeks, Jake posted more photos with Olivia on social media, and they actually looked happy together in a way that seemed real and easy. I found myself scrolling through their pictures at coffee shops and restaurants and feeling genuinely glad for them instead of bitter about how this whole situation started. What began as my plan to teach Nathan a lesson about taking people for granted turned into something good for two people who actually seemed to care about each other. Olivia looked relaxed in the photos, laughing at something Jake said, or leaning against him at some outdoor event, and Jake looked proud to be with her in a way Nathan never managed, despite all his obsessing. The whole thing felt like an unexpected positive outcome from what could have been just a messy revenge situation. Evander texted me one afternoon while I was studying in the library to say Nathan had mentioned starting therapy. He brought it up casually, like he was just passing along information without making a big deal about it, but I could tell Evander thought it was important enough to share. Nathan apparently told some people at work he was seeing someone to work through issues with self-worth and relationships, which sounded like he was actually trying to understand why he acted the way he did. I sat there in the quiet library section staring at my phone and feeling this complicated mix of emotions about the news. Part of me was glad Nathan was getting help, because nobody should go through life sabotaging their relationships due to high school insecurities. But another part of me recognized it was too late for us no matter how much therapy he got or how much he changed. The damage was already done, and I had moved past wanting to fix things between us. A guy from my statistics class asked me to get coffee the following week, and I said yes, even though I felt nervous about dating again. We talked about our research projects and complained about our professors, and it was nice but also felt weird to be sitting across from someone new. He was perfectly pleasant and seemed interested in what I had to say, which should have been enough, but I kept comparing everything to how things were with Nathan in the beginning. Over the next month, I went on a few more casual dates with different people from grad school, including a guy who studied economics and a woman from my research methods seminar. They were all fine and respectful, and some of them were even interesting to talk to, but I realized pretty quickly I wasn't ready for anything serious. My heart still felt bruised from everything with Nathan, and I needed more time to trust someone new with my feelings. The experience taught me to be more careful about who I let close to me, and to pay attention to red flags instead of explaining them away. Ariana and I spent weeks preparing our research presentation for a conference in a nearby city. We practiced our slides over and over, timing each section and anticipating questions people might ask about our methodology. The morning of the presentation, I felt sick with nerves, but Ariana kept cracking jokes to calm me down. We stood in front of a room full of professors and other grad students and walked through our findings about social media use and mental health outcomes. People actually seemed interested and asked smart questions that showed they were paying attention to our work. After the presentation, 3 different professors came up to compliment our research design, and one even asked for our contact information for potential collaboration. Walking out of that conference room with Ariana, both of us grinning like idiots, I remembered I had a whole life and identity beyond romantic relationships. My work mattered, and I was good at what I did, and that felt more important than any boyfriend drama. 3 months after the breakup, our mutual friend group settled into a new normal, where I could show up at gatherings without feeling awkward. We all met at a bar one Friday night for someone's birthday, and Nathan was there standing by the pool table. I walked in with Janice and Ariana and saw him across the room and felt nothing dramatic, just a mild awareness that my ex was present at the same party. We didn't seek each other out or try to have deep conversations, just existed in the same space like 2 people who used to know each other well but didn't anymore. When we ended up near each other getting drinks, we said polite hellos and made brief small talk about grad school before drifting back to our separate friend groups. The whole interaction lasted maybe 2 minutes and felt neither good nor bad, just neutral and manageable. Olivia and I started talking more at group events, usually ending up in conversations about work and career stuff. She worked in marketing at a firm downtown and dealt with a lot of the same male-dominated workplace nonsense I encountered in my grad program. We bonded over stories about men talking over us in meetings and taking credit for our ideas, and I found myself actually liking her as a person. She was smart and funny and kind, with this sharp sense of humor that came out when she felt comfortable. I understood why Jake fell for her because she had substance beyond just being pretty, which made Nathan's obsession seem even more shallow in retrospect. His fixation was never really about who Olivia was as an actual person with thoughts and feelings and a whole life. It was about the fantasy he built up in high school of the girl he couldn't have. Jake mentioned during a group dinner that Nathan was moving out of their shared house. The living situation had gotten too complicated with Jake dating Olivia, and Nathan still processing the breakup and everything that happened. Jake seemed relieved when he talked about it, saying Nathan was doing better overall but needed the fresh start of a new place. I asked if things were weird between them now, and Jake shrugged and said it was awkward for a while, but they were working through it. Nathan apparently apologized for asking Jake to stop seeing Olivia, admitting that was unfair, and came from a messed up place. Jake appreciated the apology and hoped Nathan would find his own happiness, instead of fixating on other people's relationships. I threw myself into finishing my grad program strong, spending long hours in the library and meeting regularly with my advisor. She called me into her office one afternoon and mentioned potential opportunities for PhD programs if I was interested in continuing my education. The conversation opened up possibilities I hadn't seriously considered before because I'd been so focused on just getting through my current degree. We talked about different schools with strong programs in my research area, and she offered to write recommendation letters and make introductions to colleagues at other universities. Walking out of her office, the future felt open and full of possibilities in a way it hadn't when I was wrapped up in Nathan's drama and trying to make sense of his behavior. Janice invited me to lunch to meet her cousin who just started grad school in a related field. His name was Kelvin, and he studied public policy with a focus on healthcare access. We sat at a small restaurant near campus and talked easily about our research and the challenges of grad school and what we wanted to do after graduation. He was respectful and listened when I talked, instead of interrupting or mansplaining concepts I already understood. He asked thoughtful questions about my work and shared his own struggles with difficult advisors and funding applications. Sitting there talking to Kelvin, I realized how much I'd gotten used to Nathan's less great behavior before Olivia even appeared. The dismissive comments and the times he'd talk over me or act like his work was more important than mine, all of that had become normal background noise I'd learned to ignore. 6 months after the breakup, we had another group dinner at a restaurant downtown. I showed up with Ariana and we grabbed seats at the long table they'd reserved for our group. Nathan walked in about 20 minutes later with a woman I didn't recognize. She seemed nice from what I could see, laughing at something Nathan said and looking comfortable holding his hand as they found chairs. She was probably around our age, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, and seemed genuinely interested when Nathan introduced her to people at the table. I watched them interact for a minute and felt genuinely nothing about it except maybe relief that he was moving forward too. No jealousy or regret or anger, just a calm acknowledgement that we were both continuing with our lives separately, which was exactly how it should be. A few weeks after that dinner where Nathan showed up with his date, Jake called me to say he and Olivia had big news to share at the next group hangout. I met everyone at the same restaurant where we'd been gathering for months, and when Jake stood up to make an announcement, Olivia was smiling beside him with her hand in his. They were moving in together and had found a great apartment closer to both their offices. Everyone cheered and congratulated them, passing around phones to look at photos of the new place. I felt genuinely happy watching them talk about paint colors and furniture shopping, and when Olivia hugged me and thanked me for being so cool about everything, I meant it when I said I was glad things worked out for them. Nathan sat at the other end of the table with his girlfriend, and he raised his glass during the toast without any visible drama or sadness. The whole celebration happened without a single awkward moment or uncomfortable silence, and I realized sitting there that I'd completely healed from what happened between Nathan and me. The hurt and anger had faded into something distant, like a bad dream I barely remembered having. My advisor called me into her office the following week with an envelope in her hand and a huge smile on her face. The PhD program I'd applied to accepted me with full funding, including a research assistant position that would cover tuition and give me a living stipend. I sat in her office staring at the acceptance letter, feeling like my entire future just opened up in the best possible way. Janice organized a celebration dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, and when I walked in, the table was full of people who'd supported me through the breakup and the stress of applications. Ariana brought a card signed by everyone in our study group, and even Camelia showed up with flowers. Jake and Olivia came together, and Jake made a toast about how proud he was to know someone so dedicated to their education and goals. Looking around the table at all these faces, some I'd known for years and some I'd only met recently, I felt overwhelming gratitude for the life I'd built here. These were people who valued me, who celebrated my successes, who never made me feel small or invisible. The breakup with Nathan felt like it happened to a different person in a different life. Sitting alone later that night in my apartment with the acceptance letter on my coffee table, I thought about everything that happened with Nathan and Olivia and the whole mess. His denials hurt so much at the time, but looking back now, they were actually a gift because they showed me exactly who he was before I wasted more years on him. If he'd kept pretending everything was fine, if Olivia had never moved here, I might have stayed with someone who would always put his ego and insecurities before my feelings. Instead, I was starting a PhD program, surrounded by real friends who would never deny knowing me or make me feel like I needed to shrink myself to make them comfortable. Nathan taught me what I wouldn't accept anymore, and that lesson was worth more than any relationship that required me to be invisible.